up my biker friends, and welcome back to another video. I'm riding the 2021 KTM 1290 Super Adventure S. I have this bike for a day, maybe two, because my KTM 1290 Super Adventure R is in the shop now. It's getting its first inspection, and it's got this big boy here to test out. Guys, I'm going to do a little walk around, just kind of point out the things that first sort of stood out to me as someone that has owned the predecessor for 3 years and had ridden it for almost 50,000 kilometers. So just looking at the S model, as you know, I've ridden the R model already. I've been able to ride it off-road too. Now this is the street version of the 1290 Super Adventure, so it looks a little different. As you can tell, it sits quite a bit lower than the R model, and it's visually apparent as well. And if you look at the tank design, this is one of the major changes that this bike design-wise has gotten. I mean, they revised a majority of the parts, but from the design end of it, this is one of the most significant changes that made us the split tank design. The whole idea was that it would actually help to balance the bike a bit better, get the center of gravity a bit lower, and that's what they've achieved by splitting the tank design, splitting the radiator. And it does handle a bit differently. You can tell just by the handling that it's a little lower with the center of gravity. It means it turns a bit easier. Also on the street version, it was apparent on the R version, but it does show on the S version as well. So just from the design end of it though, it's not as bad as on the 790, just the droopy design of it. On this 1290 they've done a bit better job. It just fits a little better, but comparing it to the 2020 model, it just kind of looks droopy and a little heavy around the edges, you know, like it has weight on the wrong spots of the design. I think the 2020 model, it looks a lot sleeker. So that's the compromise that you have to take just from the pure looks of it. Just other than that, I'm starting to like the headlight a lot better. The one thing that I don't like, I would like the bigger design of it, but I don't like is the integration of the radar sensor. It's just it could have been integrated a bit nicer than this. Now of course it looks a lot better here than it does on the R model, where there's just a gaping hole. Not sure why they didn't cover it up necessarily, but anyway, that's how it is. When it comes to seat height, now I'm comparing it to the S model I had previously. In the R model, you can even see visually it sits much lower. So this will be good for riders that are, you know, not as tall. I think taller riders would be actually better suited now with the R model, just from seating height and overall height of the bike. This seems very low to me as a comparison, but it's good because most of these adventure bikes are actually too tall for most riders. So it's nice that you have a lower seat, and it's a lot easier to bring the seat up than it is to bring it down, or, you know, do anything to the suspension necessarily. So that's just the walk around of this motorcycle. The seat, also one of the things that you notice immediately sitting on it, it would be a bit too hard for me. I don't think it's very comfortable. I didn't like the seat on the 2020 models or the 17 to 2020 models either. I had to change it out really quickly to a power part seat. I know they have a lot of different seats and as an aftermarket solution for these bikes, so, you know, if you don't like this, I'm sure there's something that will fit you and fit the comfort level that you have. Now, looking at the controls again, I think I said it on the R model too, they've finally managed to put the on and off button of the bike to its right location. That gray button used to be, or is on my bikes, on the lower end, so that's usually when where your thumb is looking for the start and emergency off button. Now they switched it around, makes a lot more sense. Also, they've added a lot more buttons to the setup here, especially the cruise control. This used to be a small little tiny button up here that would do, you know, everything from turning it on to setting the speed and changing the speed. It's now split up into 4 different buttons, 2 up top and 2 down here that go plus and minus. So I think it's a bit much. Also, it's really easy to just hit the horn rather than the reset button of the cruise control. Yeah, not really happy with that. Also, they've added the custom buttons here that you can set. That used to be on the up and down arrows on the previous bike, so you could have sort of a quick access button here that usually used to be the ride mode setting from, you know, street off-road to sport setting, and then on the lower end I would have the suspension setting, you know, setting the different suspension levels, or in the winter time I would use the upper one for the heated grips, for example, just to set these up. So it's a quick access button, and then you can get into the menu. So that's nice. That's now gone up to this side here, little fiddly button up here. Now it's not so much of an issue here on the street version because you probably don't want to crash the bike a lot, but it's more buttons. Also getting then into the actual sub menus, it's very similar. You just push a button and then go in, but it feels like it's visually nicer because you have symbols in there, and you can, even if you can't read, if you didn't have the language in there, you probably know what was going on. But it's not as intuitive as it was on the old one. It takes a lot more clicks to get to where you need to go. Now that's not the biggest deal, because once you get used to it, I'm sure you just move through the menu, like it was normal. But it was just a few less clicks that you had to do on the old one. But I like this, and also the display is nice that it's a bit bigger. And you notice when you come from the bigger, newer design to the older models that how much smaller the older one actually is. Now, most of the people won't spend a whole lot of time on it, but it's having a bigger one, it doesn't actually hurt. Also, you've got this little box here to put stuff in. Obviously, the split tank design helped to move some of the stuff out of the way. Apparently, it's also much easier to get to the air filter now than it was before. Before, you had to remove the entire tank assembly to get to the air filter. Now, that's not usually an issue if you give your bike to the service and someone has to do it. But for those people that want to maintain the bike themselves, it's nicer to not remove the whole tank, just to swap out the air filter. Also apparent is this relatively large exhaust. Okay, now these have gotten bigger over the years. This is in Euro 5 design. The sound isn't so bad. I mean, it's not as nice as it was with the old one, but even the 17 or 2020 models, they didn't have really good sound straight from the get-go. So yeah, if you wanted to do something better, you had to go with an aftermarket exhaust, and I'm sure there's going to be a whole lineup of aftermarket exhaust that hopefully, even with the Euro 5 standard, we'll get a little nicer sound that has a bit more of a baseline in the sound. This sounds a little too weak for the power that the bike has. So anyway, that was the walk around. Let's ride the bike and see how it is. Now let me talk you through some of the things that I've noticed immediately after getting onto this bike, coming from the predecessor, also from the R version. Now it's not a fair comparison because obviously the R version is much higher, it's got bigger wheels, so the bikes are quite a bit different. I have ridden the R version not too long ago in its natural habitat in the off-road environment with the Duo Action team, and now this is the street version. Now it does feel, especially coming from the R with the bigger wheel size, it feels very nimble. So the lower center of gravity that the tank brings, and I think maybe also the geometry change, but certainly the wheel sizes, it handles more like a much smaller bike. It feels almost like an 800 bike, for me at least, coming from these big bikes. It's super easy handling on the bike, carries its weight really well. I think that's a good thing. So just as what I noticed with the R model is that the display is nice and the information is displayed in a much nicer way, also with lots of graphics in there. I think that's great. The one thing that I've noticed, though, it's become less intuitive to actually work your way through the menu, and the one thing that really annoys me is this has a semi-active suspension system in here, and it's really great. The best thing about it is to actually access the different damping modes with one click of a button, which was possible on the old model because you can set two buttons to custom settings that are here now on the right hand side. It used to be on the left hand side, and you could actually go into damping mode and quickly pick something more comfortable. So I'm on a pretty bumpy road right now, so I just set it to street mode. Typically have it in sports mode, and it took me a while to I'll show you what it does. So you have to click on it, then you have to find where the setting for suspension is, then you click OK. Now you're in the right mode. I can change it now to sport, make it a bit firmer, and I can feel it immediately. Or you put it on street mode, and when you're done, you click the return button and do it one more time, and you're back where you started. That's a lot of button clicking just to set the damping setting. Before that, it was really easy. I could just click one button, change the setting, and be done with it. So unfortunately, you can't set that to the custom settings yet. I'm sure it can be done in the software settings, but that's really annoying, I have to say, that can't be done. It's one of the key features of a bike, being able to do that on the fly. Or there is a setting that I don't know of and I haven't found it yet, but it isn't apparent to me where that should be. The other thing, also overall, I said that with the R model, I think the buttons are a bit too cluttered. There's too much going on, so it makes it less user-friendly and intuitive to actually use the interface with the display. Even though the display is great, just getting to the parts is really a bit of a pain. Now that's something that you probably get used to after a while, and it won't be an issue anymore. It's just something I noticed immediately coming from the predecessor to this one, that that isn't the case. Also the buttons in itself, I mean, they look big and prominent, and I'm sure the idea was that you can get to them easier. I found though that the one that you use a lot, which is the turn signal, it takes quite a bit of while. It's, you know, taking the right turn signal and then trying to turn it off. It doesn't have the same kind of feedback as the original one, and I still struggle with it, just turn the turn signal off. So it's kind of funny. All stuff that's minor things, but it's the stuff that I immediately notice from riding the bike. So just kind of swerving back and forth. Yeah, this is definitely feels light and nimble, and I think that's nice. And I'm used to riding big motorcycles. I don't know how it would be to actually come from an 890 to this one, how that would feel. I'm sure it would feel much bigger, but for me this feels actually smaller, much smaller than the predecessor 1290 Super Adventure R for some reason. The other thing that you immediately notice when you sit down on the bike is the low seat height, and that's also a big plus, I would say. I actually noticed that this came with the highest setting in the seat height setting, and I actually set it to low right after that to just kind of see how it is, and that was actually too low for me. It was the first time that the low setting was actually too low for me, and I had to go back to the high setting because there's too much of an angle on my legs and my knees, and I didn't like that. I wasn't very comfortable. So I'm actually more comfortable in the highest setting, which is great. That means it gives you a lot more wiggle room to maybe smaller riders that want to ride a big adventure bike like this. You know, I thought maybe the sort of cutoff point was at my height about 180. Maybe you can go down a little bit to 175 in body height, and then it gets really comfortably not being able to plant both your feet down on the ground. And some riders are okay with it if you slide off the seat. That's kind of what I have to do with the R model now, but it feels nicer if you have the possibility to set both your feet down. I can easily do it with this one, and I'm sure much smaller riders, 10 centimeters less, still be comfortable sitting on it and being able to handle the bike when it's sitting there. So I think that's a big plus, that the seat height also dropped on the S model as it did on the R model. But while riding it, I was actually playing with the windshield setting. It's at the moment it's set at its highest point. You can drop it all the way down. It's really easy to do, I think, and it stays in place, which is great. I have it at the highest setting just to kind of keep the noise away. Now it works well for a standard windshield. You know, if you do long touring riding, I'm sure there will be aftermarket solutions that bring the windshield up a bit higher, especially for taller riders. That might be something you want to look at. But I was actually fine riding with this, especially now that I'm used to riding an even smaller windshield. This actually works quite well for me, I have to say. Pretty good windshield, also very sturdy, also at higher speeds. Let's talk about the ride a little bit now. Obviously I'm in Berlin, Brandenburg. I don't have twisty roads here a lot, so I can't really comment on the cornering abilities, just on and off ramps of the Autobahn a little bit, and still the tires are relatively new, so I'm not going to overdo it on this bike. But the one thing that I can check in this area here is how the bike handles at high speeds on the Autobahn. Now if you've seen my other review of the predecessor, I'll link it up here if you haven't seen it. It was really the only thing I had an issue with, because this bike was marketed as a bike that could go up to 250 kilometers an hour. And first off, I didn't actually get to the speed ever. I never had 250 showing on the display. And the second thing was that it was actually quite wobbly at high speeds. And now that was an issue that the KTM models had since the 1190, that the suspension or the entire chassis, the whole setup, wouldn't actually work at such high speeds. And the forums are full of comments on this and potential issues and fixes. Now I was experimenting a little bit myself, and of course there's a lot of factors that come into play. One thing is wind turbulence. So if you're in traffic and there's turbulence from other cars around you, that definitely influences how the bike behaves. Also, if there's no wind, then you can typically go faster. There's a lot of wind coming, especially from the side, that impacts how fast you can go. And last but not least, the clothing you're wearing. So I've got pretty loose adventure riding gear on, and that's not a good thing. If I have something tighter fitting, that would allow me to go faster. The other thing is balancing tires, the steering damper, the steering head bearing. There's tons of stuff that you can set, but it doesn't matter. It should work straight out of the box if you have a bike like this, and you shouldn't be looking at all these things and trying to optimize just to get the last bit of speed out of the bike. Now It took me a while to actually get it up to speed because there's a lot of traffic in the Autobahns around it, but I did take it up to almost full speed. I never got it to 250, even with the throttle all the way open, but I did ride it well over 200 kilometers an hour, and I can tell you they have fixed the issue. I've tried it quite a few times today just to kind of see what happens, and it's a little windy today. There was quite a bit of traffic and turbulence, and this bike did really well. I know in those conditions that my old S model would have started to wobble at around 200, maybe 210 kilometers an hour, and this bike was stable. Now it doesn't mean it's all rock stable. There's still a lot of turbulence and wind going on. You're still shaking around on the bike, but it's not like the handlebars are flip-flopping all over the place, but that stays relatively steady, which is good. So I think they have changed it, and I know the geometry changes. They changed the front angle of the forks a little bit, and I know that the rear swing arm got longer, and whatever else they did, it actually works at high speeds. Now I know this is not going to be an issue for most people that watch this, is us Germans that actually can go fast on the Autobahn. Most people don't want to go that fast for an extended period of time because yeah, it takes quite a bit of energy out of you. But it's nice to know that you can and that the bike will do it. So I'm quite happy. Well done, KTM. That's good. Now, I've also tried out the radar assisted cruise control on the bike. Now I know I was ripping on it the very first time I talked about this bike. I don't see a big need for a radar assisted cruise control on a motorcycle, especially this one. It's got 160 horsepower. It's a sports adventure bike, and I didn't really see the need to actually put in the radar assisted cruise control. Now it comes with the bike standard. Don't need it, don't want it, you can turn it off. And if you do want to try it out, of course you have the option to try it, and of course there are scenarios where you can certainly use it. I don't use the cruise control a lot anyway. I usually use it when I'm going through towns, just try to keep within the speed limits. Gives me time to rest my the throttle hand, to just kind of take the hands off and rest a little bit, especially on long tours. I usually don't use it in fast flowing traffic on the Autobahn. I want to be in control and make sure I can react quick enough, because there's always someone that may cut into your lane. I want to be 100% alert. This is not the time to take the attention off the road. But guys, it's up to you if you want to try it. I did try it a few times, and for the most part it did what it's supposed to do. I mean, I have a system like this in my car, and I use it a lot more in the car if I'm going through, you know, rush hour traffic, stop and go traffic, or slow moving traffic. I use it and I actually appreciate and like it quite a bit. Now with this one here, I was trying different scenarios and kind of see if it would actually apply the brakes and not just give it throttle and take the throttle off, but would it actually apply the brakes when you get too close to someone. And actually it does. So it will brake for you. It's not just throttle and decelerate, but it actually steps on the brakes for you, which is a scary thought when you think about it, but that's what it does. And for the most part it was relatively smooth. There was one incident when I very first tried it. There was someone going into the left turning lane and just turning to the side, and of course it takes a while for the radar system to see that that person is actually not in front of you anymore. It's actually turning left, so it was really applying the brakes. It was a bit jerky, and you know, if you would have controlled the bike, you would have just gone forward and that would have been it. So you know, it's a bit of a jerky. It's not as smooth of a ride. And then switching lanes, same thing. You turn out, it takes a moment to think about it, and then accelerate. Sometimes it's a bit smoother, sometimes it's not. And then when you turn back into the lane, there's someone that's actually going slower than you are. It will actually slow the bike down. There was one incident though, however, that didn't go so smoothly, and that was me just following in a sort of speed limited construction zone, following a black Audi, I think it was, and it was going steady speeds. I wasn't touching anything, and all of a sudden I had the speed set to I don't know, just over 100. We were going around 80. I don't know what it was, but it was actually accelerating, and it was actually trying to rear end the car in front of me for no apparent reason. Somehow the radar system must have been blind at that very moment. That was a scary thought, because that didn't do what it is supposed to do. I don't know how often that happens. Bad enough that it happens once, but it can happen. That means you need to be attentive to what's happening. You can't just let off with the concentration. If something like this happens, you need to be covering your brakes, otherwise you may run into the issue and stuff goes sideways. So that's not very good. So in essence, I probably wouldn't pay extra for it to get something like this, because I wouldn't have a use for it. But of course, once you have it on the bike and you start using it, I'm sure you can find a good use for it, and you'll probably get, oh wow, check this out. Germans are really big into asparagus. This is white asparagus, the way it's covered up, and it's pretty much close to asparagus season, isn't it? Or already is, actually. So overall, if I compare directly to the predecessor S model, I also noticed that things got a lot smoother. I think they're more accessible for most riders, or if you're looking at it from a negative way, the beast lost a little bit of its bite. It lost a little bit of its edge and aggressiveness that it had beforehand, that I really appreciated. This bike is a bit toned down version of it. Now for most riders that's actually not a bad thing. For me, I just noticed right away that, you know, it's not as snappy aggressive, not as growly from the engine, so you lose a little bit on that end, but of course you gain some of the other things, better handling and stuff. But that's something I noticed a little bit. Yeah, this is the thing, is like, you know, just resetting the turn signal takes a little bit of a push. Anyway guys, this is it for me, for my assessment on the KTM 1290 Super Adventure S, the 2021 model. To summarize it up for you, the things that stood out for me, of course, are the much better handling due to the split tank design, and maybe the geometry changes, is hard to say. That's really good. Also, that they've fixed the high-speed wobble on this motorcycle. They've finally fixed the issue. The bike will go fast, and will go fast in a relatively stable manner. That's a huge improvement on the predecessor. Also, I like the lower seat height, not so much for myself, but for the fact that it makes this a lot more accessible for other riders as well, because now you can, even if you're maybe 170 tall, you can easily take a look at this bike again, because you will be able to sit comfortably on this one and actually reach with your feet down. Also, I like the additional settings that you can do on the electronics. There's a lot more customizations that you can make. The larger display, that's really good. Definitely is a progression of how you can sort of fine-tune and custom tune the bike. Let's talk about the things that I don't like, especially as compared to the predecessor of the bike. The first thing would be definitely the design. I like the old design better. It's a sleeker, more sportive, stylish styling than this bike. Just from the looks of it, I think the predecessor looks nicer than this one, hands down, no question about it. Also, I don't like that it lost the aggressive edge, the beastiness of the predecessor. I know it's a bit more tamed down version for whatever reason. It will most likely be appealing to most other riders, but I think that was something that made the character of the predecessor of the bike. Now, if I had this bike for myself, it probably wouldn't be an issue after riding it for a while, but the immediate transition points that out. Also, something I don't like is the interface, from the user interface to how you actually set your settings. It starts with the clutterness of the buttons, all the way down to the fact that you actually can't have a custom button to quickly access different damping modes. I mean, this semi-active suspension system, that's one of the major benefits of having the response of the suspension setting, change the response of the suspension settings with a click of a single button. And here it takes multiple clicks to even get to the sub menu, so you can't really do it on the fly without taking a major part of your attention off riding the bike to actually making the settings. Now, I'm sure that can be changed easily with a software update, but the bike that I have here, it's not possible to set it to any of the custom keys, so that's a big downer. Overall, I think it's a great bike. If you're in the market for a state-of-the-art adventure bike, take a look at this one here. There's definitely a lot to like on the motorcycle. If you want to go more onto off-road riding, if you're a taller rider, you may want to take a look at the R model. I also think the R model looks a little better than this one. Just the colors, the graphics, and the fact that it's a bit taller off the ground makes it look a little nicer than this one here. But it's a great bike. I liked riding it quite a bit, and I was glad to actually have the chance to ride it. I'm sure I didn't cover everything, but if I forgot something, please leave it in the comment section. If you liked the video, give me a thumbs up. If you aren't already a subscriber, please subscribe to the channel. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, ride safe and stay awesome.
Take me back.